Gospel for this morning is read from the 3rd chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so for now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated, or maybe I should say, please stand. Fortunately, you all know what I mean. Well, I want to begin this morning by saying a very heartfelt, very sincere thank you to all of you for the generous gift that you gave us last Sunday and for the very, very kind card. I've said it before and I've said it again. I count it a huge privilege and an honor to be asked and invited to be your interim pastor for this year. We came here expecting to be part of a church. And instead, I think what we've found is that we have made a whole lot of new friends here, and we have become part of a family away from our own family. So for that, we are, I don't know that I can ever adequately express how much we appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you for being who you are and for inviting us to be a part of you. So I've been thinking a lot about this interim thing. Frankly, before I came here last August, I had absolutely no experience being interim pastor, zero. I've had lots of experience being a pastor, but this whole interim thing has been new to me. So it's natural, I think, that now 5 months in, I've found myself asking a lot of questions. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I missing something? Should I be doing something differently? Is there something that I'm not honoring as far as the contract that I have with you goes? So I went back this week and I looked at the guidelines for interim ministry that were given to me when I first arrived, and I read through them, and I have to tell you, one sentence caught my attention. It said, quote, "The primary role of an interim pastor is to promote the overall health and vitality of a congregation and to prepare the way for a new pastor." It's that last part that really has been kind of sticking with me this week, that last sentence, to prepare the way for a new pastor. How do I do that? Well, I've been thinking a lot about that, and there are a variety of ways that I can do it, but I've decided that one thing I can do is talk about it here in church. So I've decided to do a series of sermons on the topic of being people of Christ. Each Sunday for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to share some thoughts about what I think it might mean for you to be people of Christ, to maintain a healthy and vital church, and to prepare for a new pastor. And I don't mean, when I say being people of Christ, I don't just mean being people of Christ Lutheran Church. Even more than that, I mean being people of Jesus Christ. So each week I'm going to highlight one trait. At the end of the 6th week, there will be 6 traits that I can entrust to you for you to think about, pray about. Each week I'll highlight one trait that I think is going to help you prepare and to continue to be the church that you want to be. So today, my message is titled, Being People of Christ, One Thing. The most profoundly challenging question that I've ever been asked was asked to me by a 93-year-old woman who was in a nursing home. It came to me at a time in my life when if you'd asked me, I would have told you life was just sailing along. Jill and I had just bought a new home. I had a great job. I was making more than adequate money, serving as the executive of a large healthcare corporation with 200 employees underneath me. I was on 9 boards of directors. I was the president of a statewide organization. I was at the top of life's ladder, and I was feeling darn good about myself. But then came the question. I was walking through a nursing home when I heard a voice shouting from one of the patient rooms, "Young man, come here! Young man, you that just walked by, come here!" And I pretended at first like I didn't hear it, and I kept walking, just thinking I would ignore it. But something said I should go back. And sure enough, the voice kept yelling, "Come here, come here." And I walked into the room, and that's when I got the question. I remember that 93-year-old woman pointing at me, and I just remember, I can see it in my eye, her finger was crooked, and she was pointing at me like that. And she said, "Young man, what are you going to do with your life?" I didn't even know her. What's interesting is I did know the answer. I could easily spout off a litany of all the goals and ambitions I had for myself, most of which included making a certain amount of money and having titles behind my name and having certain possessions. But before I had a chance to even say, she was already saying the next thing. She said, "What I mean is this. When you get to be as old as I am and you're laying in a nursing home bed and you're unable to do much at all, and you're looking back on your life and thinking about all your memories and all of those kinds of things, what is the one thing more than anything else that you want to be able to say that you did with your life? One thing that is more important than everything else." One thing. Wow. I have to tell you, I couldn't answer. All the things that I'd been thinking about that were important to me, being successful, being a good dad, being a good husband, living in a nice house, having an important job, all of those things were good answers, but were they the answer? Were any of them that one thing that truly is more important than everything else? None of them was that answer. I knew it. The question haunted me for weeks and months. This question stewed and stirred within me, before finally I knew what the answer was. To this day, it's still my answer, and now at this point I'm going to frustrate you a little bit by saying I'm not going to tell you what my answer is. Not today anyway. Because that's not the purpose of my sharing that story with you. The purpose of my story is to invite you to live with the question yourself. What one thing, more than anything else, do you want to be able to say that you did with your life? One thing. To give that question a little bit of a twist as you enter into this year that undoubtedly is going to bring big change to this church, let me ask this. What one thing, more than anything else, do you want to be able to say that you did as the people of Christ? If you could only have one accomplishment as a church, one lasting legacy, what would that be? In some ways, you've already answered that question. Founded 106 years ago, thereabouts, this place has gone through a series of name changes. First, you were Scandinavian Lutheran Church. Then you were First Lutheran Church, and then some 60 years ago, you changed the name again, this time hopefully for good. You could have made it Trinity Lutheran Church, or All Saints Lutheran Church, or Bethlehem Lutheran Church, or Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church, or I suppose 1,000 other names. But you said, we want to be Christ Lutheran Church. More than anything, you said you wanted to be known as people of Christ. And I say, what an awesome and fantastic statement that is. About not only who you wanted to be then, but I think about who you still want to be. I know a lot of you are basketball fans. It seems like every Sunday, 2 or 3 or 4 of you come up to me and say, "Did you see the Gonzaga game?" I know that you're basketball fans, especially Gonzaga fans. And so those of you who are longtime Gonzaga basketball fans, I want to tell you a story. Any of you remember Ronnie Turioff? One of the greatest players ever to play at Gonzaga. He graduated in 2005, 15 years ago. He went on to enjoy 10 seasons in the National Basketball Association, so he was a very good player. But not only was he a great basketball player, by all accounts, he was an even more wonderful human being. He was extremely smart. I don't know if you know, he spoke 5 languages fluently. He graduated from Gonzaga with a triple major, and he got straight A's all the way through. But he was also friendly, and he was very well liked, and he was very down to earth. And after he turned pro and started making all this money, he started a foundation to provide health care with children who had no insurance. Let's just say Ronnie Turioff was very well liked and respected. After graduating from Gonzaga, he was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers and was about to begin his NBA career, and by rule he had to undergo a physical exam. No problem for a great athlete like him, right? Wrong. During the physical exam, they discovered an enlarged aorta, a life-threatening condition that required immediate surgery, open heart surgery. Everything in Ronnie Turioff's dream world was suddenly flipped upside down. At the time, the Seattle Times newspaper wrote an article that interviewed him, and this article perfectly illustrated how his perspective on life had so all of a sudden completely flip-flopped. Right before his surgery, Ronnie Turioff said this: "Last week, all I wanted was my first paycheck so I could buy a Cadillac Escalade with 24-inch rims and spinners. Today, I just want to wake up again." Interesting, isn't it, how the unexpected and sometimes cruel twists and turns of life so completely change your perspective. Life can be like that. One minute, everything is going along perfectly well, sailing along as I said I was doing way back when. And the next thing, bam! A traffic accident, a lost job, that dreaded C word, cancer. A spouse who once said, "I do forever," now says, "I don't even want to for one more minute." Alzheimer's, a heart attack, the death of someone you love. Jason read the words from Hebrews just a few minutes ago, and in that second reading from Hebrews, the writer uses a very bold Greek word. The Greek word is ankion, ankion. Our English translation translates it as weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, weight. But literally, that Greek word means something much bigger than that. It means it's a huge crate packed with iron tools. Can you even picture that? Imagine that. Imagine a huge crate packed with heavy iron tools that you're trying to move around, that you can't move no matter what. You can't lift it. You can't budge it. Well, that's the image that the writer of Hebrews is trying to get across to us when he says, "Let us lay aside every weight." Life can be like that weight. You get buried by a huge crate full of iron tools, and in an instant, life is changed. In the midst of it all, the writer goes on to say, what do we do about that weight? We are to lay aside that gargantuan tool chest, and we are to look to Jesus. Look to Christ. I don't know about you, but that's easier said than done. What I've discovered about life is that it's a lot easier to be people of Christ when things are going well. It's far more difficult to be people of Christ when tragedies strike, and sooner or later those tragedies strike us all. As I begin this series of sermons, my question is this: how can you be people of Christ all the time in all circumstances? How can you always make sure that you look to Jesus in everything that you do, that in all circumstances Christ is most important, front and center? How can you make sure that you're always asking in every single situation in this congregation, what would Christ do? What would Christ want for us? What would Christ think? What would Christ say? At the risk of making it way too easy, I'd like to suggest this. Every single day, remember that you are marked forever with the cross of Christ. When you were baptized, that cross was marked on your forehead. It will again be marked on your forehead with ashes when you come to church on Ash Wednesday. That cross is your identity as individuals and as the church. And I'm going to give you a heads up right now that starting next Sunday, I'm going to move the baptismal font somewhere in here so that when you come forward for communion, you can dip your finger into it and remember that you are marked with the cross of Christ forever. Several years ago, I was invited to serve as the director of the ELCA's Western States Youth Gathering, an event that brings together more than 2,000 teenagers from across the United States, the Western United States. teenagers who come together to celebrate and grow in their faith. And as you can imagine, this is a huge undertaking. It's a huge production. It involves some very high-tech, high-powered people to make that event a success. One of the first things that I did as director was to hire a big-time production company to do this high-tech visual imagery, massive virtual waterfalls that came through the arena that we were meeting in. There were planets and nebula that would randomly drift across the ceiling. There was a great big gargantuan Earth that was suspended, 3D Earth that was suspended from the ceiling. There were incredible special effects spinning in and out all the time. All of this was created by this big shot company that was used to producing shows for companies like Microsoft and Revlon and Starbucks, and for famous bands and for big name entertainers. It was a company that had truly mastered the art of working in a high pressure, fast paced world of business and entertainment. So when the executive producer of this big company showed up the first day of the event, he was almost unbearable. From the very beginning, he was obnoxiously barking out orders to people. He was bossy. He was telling lighting people and video people and sound technicians in the rudest possible ways what they should be doing. Every word out of his mouth was curt and sharp and stern. When someone didn't perform up to his expectations, he got in their face, he yelled at them, he condemned, he swore, he demanded perfection. That was the world that he had learned to live in and learned to succeed in. The third day of the youth gathering, something incredible happened. In the middle of one of our worship services, which of course this guy wasn't used to doing. After all, how many worship services do you see at a Revlon convention or at a rock concert? In this third day, in the middle of this worship service, we were all handed face paint. And we were asked to paint the sign of the cross on someone else's face and remind them that no matter what they might face in life, they would always and forever be marked with the cross of Christ, and that God would always, in every instant, be holding them in his hands. So we all went around and we marked the sign of the cross on people's faces with this face paint. I remember a 16-year-old girl, Sarah. I can see her. I know her name was Sarah. She took a handful of paint. She walked up to that big shot producer, and she plopped a cross on his face from the top of his forehead to the bottom of his chin and from one ear to the next. And she looked him in the eye. And she declared to this uptight producer of $1 million shows, "Child of God, you are marked with the cross of Christ forever." And she said it with the most beautiful smile on her face. And I'm here to tell you that guy was not the same after that. It was as if he had been not invited, not ushered, but catapulted into a new perspective that he had never even considered before. A seed was planted that day, and for the first time that man got a glimpse of the one thing in all of life that truly might be more important than anything else that he could ever have planned or imagined. What was it that Sarah said? "Child of God, you are marked with the cross of Christ forever." As I'm getting to know you, I'm learning how many of you have had to face unexpected and unwanted detours along life's way. Some of the challenges you faced are huge. As a church, you have faced some tough situations. If I have one hope for you, one hope that's greater than all others, one legacy that you might consider leaving with anyone who encounters you, one gift that you could give to your new pastor, it's this. No matter what life may throw at you, no matter what the circumstances, remember the cross marked on your face in baptism: Christ. Remember the name that you have chosen for yourself: Christ. Remember the one thing that truly is more important than all others: Christ. It may not inoculate you from some of the things that hurt in life, but it will remind you that there's nothing in all creation that can ever come between you and God that will ever be more powerful than God's love and care for you. Not pastors coming and going, not financial struggles, not quarrels big or small, not sickness, not tragedy, not being betrayed or hurt, not losses, not death, nothing in every circumstance of your life as individuals and as a church, there is a God who loves you fully, forgives you completely, promises to walk with you in every instance, and never lets you out of his care. Being people of Christ doesn't mean you have to fully understand or get that. It simply means that you should just consider the possibility that it's true, and that it's God's greatest desire that you should reflect it in every action, every decision, every word, every day, especially as a church. One thing above all else: Christ. That's what this number 1 is going to signify, and I'm going to leave it before you each and every week for the next 6 weeks. One thing: Christ. Let nothing be more important than that. Let it guide and direct everything you do. Let your new pastor know without question that's who you are. Do that, and you will show by your example that you are people of Christ. Next week, I will share with you some thoughts about a turtle on a fence post. Amen.